Greetings, friend, and welcome to the Between the Covers podcast, where we are working every day to remove the self-limiting beliefs that are preventing us from becoming the heroes of our own stories. I am Marcus Barr, and today, let's talk about creativity, specifically taking back our creativity. This is something that is very near and dear to me because I feel like my creativity has been stolen so many times, and in a lot of ways, I really struggle to know where it's at. Here are my thoughts. We live more and more in a consumeristic society than I feel like ever before. And one of the things that is very common is when we are more focused on consuming, then we're not so focused on producing at the same time. I know that I will oftentimes use the excuse that I'm going to play some games, or I'll even read a book, or I'll watch a movie, and I will just focus on how the story is being crafted and how I am able to borrow from some of the ideas that I'm seeing. And a lot of times, that's not actually what's going on. In my life personally, what is oftentimes taking place is I'm just wanting to consume. I just want to play the game. I just want to watch the show. I want to watch the movie. And then as soon as it's done, just kind of check out and forget what had just happened. I believe that in the vast majority of us, we have an innate desire to create. And for many of us, this is really getting into my story here. One of the things about being creative is we oftentimes have our creativity criticized by well-meaning individuals and maybe some not so well-meaning individuals. I think of a time when I was working on my novel and I finished more than the first draft. I had already done some revisions on it, and there was the husband of a coworker of my mom's, because that's oftentimes how this kind of stuff goes. It's someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone, who offered to read over my manuscript at the time and offer some feedback. And I'm like, wow, okay, this sounds really promising. I like the idea of this. And after I emailed him the story, or maybe I even dropped off a physical copy, I forget exactly how it was, because this was over 10 years ago now. The guy had some very good constructive feedback. And then as he continued to talk, my stomach started to not feel very good, because he had taken it and had already come up with an idea of what the cover would look like and how to pitch it to here, and apparently spoke with someone that he knows at DreamWorks in order to see if there was any kind of potential for a movie. And supposedly this individual was interested in seeing if there was any way to turn my story into a movie. And it just, to me, it really felt like it was too good to be true. Now, some people would hear that story and are like, man, Marcus, you really missed out on an opportunity there. But something in my body just did not feel right about that. And I walked away. And I'm kind of glad that I did, because the story has morphed since then. It's turned into a completely different tale. And I want to see what happens with this one. Yet those kind of experiences, when there are individuals who, say, take advantage of those of us who are naive and are just more focused on the creativity and not really so caught up in the details about marketing or promotion, getting it out there. It's like we just want to create. These kind of experiences can make it, at least in my scenario, in my situation, it made it hard for me to focus on creating again. I am recording this about halfway through August, and one of the things that has come up a lot for me is I want to create. I want to be creative. And yet, time after time after time after time after time, over and over again, I will fall into the behavior of believing the self-limiting beliefs that I'm just not good enough, and just focus on on consuming what others have created. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's inherently problematic to consume. However, one of the things that is very problematic for an individual like me is I can get so lost in consuming other people's creativity that I just completely starve my own. I don't like that. And yet part of me also really likes it because it's not as scary. What I do is I consume, I take in what others have created, and then I have the opportunity to criticize what this other person has done, what has been created. Maybe it's the fact that I watch a movie and I was able to pick up every single plot point that came about before it even revealed itself in the movie. Maybe it was, there was actually something that surprised me and I didn't expect in some kind of media that I took in. Just a quick reminder, if you have a question that you'd like to have discussed on this podcast, or have ideas of a hero for one of my monthly hero studies, then fill out the form on my website at the link in the description to my podcast page, where you can submit questions or ideas of individuals that can be featured as a hero. Regardless of what the reason is, what I do is I allow myself to just take in and become a critic instead of being brave enough to produce and allow others to consume and criticize. I really struggle with that idea. I don't want to be hurt, which is why I don't create. I guess I'm creating with this podcast, but it's also not big enough to get a whole lot of attention right now. It doesn't have a whole lot of downloads or views or listens, however you want to look at the metrics for it. And that means there's not a whole lot of ears taking this information in, and a lot of different perspectives and ideas that are going to run counter to what I am creating and therefore garner criticism. Is that how I want it to stay? Not really. Yet I also know I'm not going to please everyone. There are so many people that are just going to listen to my words and just think that I am an ignorant idiot, or maybe even worse than that. And they're not going to have anything constructive to say. They'll just be criticizing for the sake of criticizing. You really can't get away from the trolls, especially in this age of the internet. And that's something that I am afraid of, which means that I don't take back my creativity. I allow my creativity to remain locked up inside of me where it doesn't want to be, because it wants to create. It wants to explore. It wants to have fun. and I just get bogged down by my own fears. If this is sounding at all familiar to you, then what I encourage you to do is, for one thing, don't do what I'm doing a lot of the times, and actually take back your creativity. Allow yourself to create. One of the things that I've been hearing a lot, in fact, I just heard this on a podcast earlier today. There is this dynamic that is taking place, especially here in the United States, that whatever it is that we create needs to be a commodity of some form or fashion. I do not have ads on this podcast. And some people would say that's probably not the smartest thing because, well, you could be making a little money while you're doing this. I'm not doing this for money. And that's very countercultural to what most people would expect from something such as a podcast. However, when I think about my story, when I think about my book, of course I'm thinking about trying to get it out into the public sphere and sell it. Try and make a profit off of it. Try and garner enough attention and enough fans to make it a series that, I don't know, maybe becomes a movie or a TV show or webcomic or whatever it happens to be. So my thoughts are not on the creation, they are on how can I make this good enough to get the following necessary so that I can make money off of it. I'm turning my creativity into a commodity. That hasn't been a very helpful mindset for me. Why don't I just create for the sake of creating? Why don't I just write just to write? Why do I have to do this with the idea that I'm going to try and pitch it to strangers who are going to determine the future of my work, of my creativity? And when I think about that, I become paralyzed. In fact, this was many years ago now, probably over a decade or about a decade ago. I was introduced to the concept of the wall of awful. This is something that my partner Libby had discovered, and it's essentially you try to do something and you run into a wall, and the wall is so overwhelming that you just can't get around it or over or break through it. And this was actually through a webcomic that they were describing this. And there was someone on the other side of the wall just peeking around the corner and saying, hey, you can get around the wall over here. But the person who was looking at the wall could not see a way around it. And it doesn't matter what kind of help or advice or coaching that you get, if you are just stuck in front of this wall of awful, then you're stuck. And that's oftentimes what happens to me. I think about doing some of this work. I think about being creative. And there I go. I called it work again. I think about being creative. I think about doing something that a core part of me really wants to do. And I just hit this wall. And I can't get over it. I can't get over it. I can't go around it. I can't go through it. It's impenetrable and I'm just stuck. This comes down to that dreaded E word of expectations. Because I'm going in this with the wrong expectations. I'm trying to think about my novel in terms of it becoming a New York Times bestseller. The likelihood of something like that happening, while I would love for it to happen, the likelihood of it happening is so small. And because something like that is not realistically in the cards for me, I just don't think that I'm good enough. I'm not good enough to be a New York Times bestselling author. And there comes the negative core beliefs, or maybe not even core beliefs, but just the negative messages and the negative beliefs that I have about myself that are keeping my creativity tamped down. A lot of this work seems to stem from, what are you telling yourself? What do you believe about yourself? And I'm asking myself that question almost on a daily basis now. Why do I think that I'm not good enough? Because I take my first draft and I compare it to what I have on my bookshelf? That's not a fair comparison. Do I think I'm not good enough because there's just so much about getting a book edited and published and marketed that I just don't understand? And one of the revelations I had just within the last couple of years is that what if I do find that success? What if I do find the success of being a New York Times bestselling author? What if I get a publishing deal? What if someone likes my story so much that they want me to write another one or another two that are tied to the same story in the same universe? And now I only have a year in order to turn around a novel. And that fear comes up inside me again. I get incredibly lost in my own thoughts because I overwhelm my creativity with all of this fear. One more quick reminder, if you are enjoying this podcast, then please subscribe to this channel, and that way you don't miss out on any future uploads. If you want to take back your creativity, that means you need to stop listening to the fear messages. That means you need to just explore and play. I had a client who was very much in this same mode as well. He was great at consuming. And yet there was a part of him that really wanted him to create. What he had told me in one of the last sessions that we had is he was going to create a backstory for a character in a game that he was playing. Your character didn't have any kind of a backstory. So he wanted to do that. And he wasn't going to share it with anyone. Maybe that's something that I need to do. Maybe that's something that you need to do. Just have fun with it. Don't worry about having others see or observe or critique or criticize what you want to be creative with. Another thing that has made it challenging for me to take back my creativity is the number of times that I have done something creative and it has figuratively and at other times literally just exploded in my efforts. This novel that I'm working on, it is on its 4th or 5th iteration. I started working on it back when I was in middle school. I was in the 6th grade when I started working on this. I was 13 years old. This is 27 years ago. And while I was working on it and having a great time, I started taking, this was back in high school, my freshman high school teacher, Tracy Money, I don't mind name dropping her, Tracy Money. She was my freshman English teacher. And she actually encouraged me to write and to create this book and get it out there. So I was seriously starting to consider it, and I was seriously working on it. And I was typing it up on my computer. And then the motherboard cracked. Took everything with it. I lost all of that hard work because I didn't back it up anywhere. Being the teenager who believes that he's invincible even after something like that, I just started over from the beginning. And a big part of my process is I write longhand with pen and paper, and then I transcribe it to the computer. So I didn't lose everything per se, but I lost a lot of my additions that I added. So I started typing it up again, and I got about 3 chapters in, and my computer crashed again, and I lost all my work because, once again, I didn't back it up. This has happened more times than those 2 that I shared. Some would even say that maybe my story is cursed because it keeps breaking things. And another example, when I was a senior in high school, I took a ceramics class, and I had done some just middling work with clay in the past, and I was actually having a great time working with clay. We were working on an assignment where we were tasked with creating a bust sculpture. I was, again, just in my usual mode, creating the bust of an elf character from my story. As I was working on this creation, it was beautiful. I could not believe how well this sculpture was coming along. I was meticulous in crafting the really long elfin ears of this character. And I worked really hard on getting her face to just be structured just so. And I was incredibly awestruck by what I was creating. This was the first time I had created something and I had an image of what it would look like in my head, and it was actually turning out right. In most of my artistic endeavors, when we're talking like physical art with painting and drawing and sculpting, most of the time I've got this incredible image in my head and things just don't turn out the way that they are in my head, and it just drives me crazy. I get done with this creation, and it was time for it to be fired in the kiln. And when I came in, I think it was like after a weekend or something like that, I came in and the teacher had a very sullen look on her face and had told me that my sculpture was damaged. One of the other students had, while working on her sculpture, without meaning to, created an air pocket in the clay. And as it was being fired in the kiln, part of her sculpture exploded, literally. And it was directly across mine in the kiln. And the shrapnel knocked off, I think it knocked off one of the ears and a sizable portion of the left cheek. And I was crushed. with the help of my ceramics teacher, I tried to use glue to get these pieces back on and try and make it what it was, and it just couldn't do it. I don't even remember if I actually went as far as to paint that. Maybe I did. But in the end, I don't have that anymore. Because in my heartbreak, I threw it out. Once it was graded, I just didn't want to keep it anymore. I was literally crushed by my creativity just being destroyed by a random fluke. All of that to say that there are so many things that want to hold me back from my creativity. And maybe there are things that are holding you back from your creativity. Maybe you have some individuals who have been incredibly critical of what you have tried to pursue. Maybe it's something with music, maybe it's something with dance or theater or some other kind of performing art. Whatever it is important to take your creativity back. Whatever the messages are that are telling you that you shouldn't or that you're not good enough, figure out where those are coming from. I think I shared on a previous podcast that I was doing some digital art, and I shared this with my mom, and she said that she was glad to hear that I was getting back into digital art because she always thought that I was good. And I was blown away because that wasn't really the message that I received growing up. Then again, I was also an angsty teenager when a lot of this was going on, so maybe she actually was affirming and I was just not receiving it. Because a lot of these messages also came from one of the darkest times of my life. Regardless, figure out where those messages are coming from. Maybe they're coming from well-intentioned critics that are friends and family. Maybe they're coming from trolls online that are individuals who are never going to find anything good to say about anything ever if it's not directly within the sphere of their interest or their beliefs, and therefore they have every right to speak about whatever it is that is incorrect or wrong or not proper or just not right. I use air quotes there. About what you have created. Take the opportunity to just create for the sake of creating. I feel like this podcast has kind of been like that for me. I have really struggled with my voice, believing that I have anything valuable to say. And so I'm putting my voice out there. I'm putting it out there for people to criticize and critique or maybe even find inspiration from. You'll notice how little I had in the positive category of that. As soon as I said it, I caught myself saying that. Maybe inspiring others, but of course it's out there for people to critique and criticize. Yet there is so much more that I want to do. I have always wanted to create a video game. I've wanted to create this book. I've wanted to do art. I've just want to create. I want to have fun. I want to just share these beautiful ideas that I have. And for me to do that is going to require me to stop buying into all of this bullshit that I keep hearing from other people or I've heard from other people, and just create. Allow myself the freedom to create. And not even look at it in terms of how I can make a profit or sell or whatever. Just enjoy the creative experience. One of the things that I often say a lot is how I am doing this to remind myself of what it is that I want to do or that I need to do. And hopefully this reminder to myself has also inspired and reminded you of what you can do with your own creativity. Go out there and be creative. We need more people who are creative. We need more people to create. And this is as much to myself as it is to you. And until next time, live strong for today.